versions of it, that's when I get my, like, I was just pulling slides for the senior center tomorrow.
Well, good evening. Welcome to the Westborough Finance Advisory Committee meeting, number 24 of fiscal year 22. Today is February 17th, 2022. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, meetings conducted by hybrid means will be conducted in person and via remote access in accordance with applicable law. This means that members of the public body may access these meetings in person or via remote means using the following link, and the link has been posted. When required by law or allowed by the chair, persons wishing to provide public comment or otherwise participate in the meeting may do so by accessing the meeting by in-person attendance. Additionally, meetings are broadcast in real time via Westborough TV, Verizon Channel 28, or Charter Channel 192, or on www.youtube.com/WestboroughTV. We have some guests this evening from the school committee. Chair of the school committee, Kristen Vincent, Superintendent Amber Bach, Assistant Superintendent David Meyer, and Director of Finance David Gordon. Welcome. Thank you for coming. We're going to dispense with the minutes of the previous meetings until after our conversation with the school committee. So Amber, or if you're ready, let's do it.
I am. Good to see all of you. So we were able to have a school committee meeting last night. I don't know if any of you were able to watch. And we've continued to work on reviewing our budget. We've also continued conversations with you. So I appreciate the invitation to come back and meet with you and continue the conversations necessary for you to have confidence and support in our budget. And so I guess I would open it up for the best process for the chair and for the committee to get the information you need from us to continue to move forward in assessing the budget. So we definitely left our last summit meeting having covered a lot of ground. My understanding is you were able to then have continued conversation with the school committee, where I think they were able to answer additional questions for you. So it feels probably most productive for the three of us or the four of us to work off of the questions you have. And be responsive to keep letting you kind of drill down to the level that you need. I do have some additional updates if you want me to provide them as an overview of a couple changes that were made to the budget last night. And I could do those first, and then we could open up conversation.
Why don't we do that, because I know Hank Rauch has sent you some responses to your questions about what we might want to cover tonight.
Sure.
And then Hank, once you're finished with your presentation, Hank will lead the discussion.
That sounds great. Thank you. So this is the budget presentation that we utilized when we met with you at the summit. And in looking at a couple updates that I wanted to provide to you, I'll take you to the relevant slide of conversation. Two changes. We changed a warrant article, and we did a little research that we added a research slide on for you. and we reduced the transportation budget. So let me take you to that key slide and we'll have a discussion. So at the meeting last night, you know, at our last meeting, we had left with the current standing of this slide, which represented the increase that we were requesting in moving the budget forward, the 5.8%. It basically constitutes the increase of the salaries, and you look at the increases there down the one side, the impact of the circuit breaker gap, and then really the three areas of increase that we went back and we looked at was the 132,589, which is our transportation. Where'd my slide go? Hold on. I don't know.
Karen, we
wasn't-
lost.
It wasn't me.
It's okay.
We'll just see. Yep.
I hate to interrupt. Paul may be trying to get into the meeting.
Oh, maybe. All right, I'm back. So that's okay, thank you. So we had continued to look at the transportation budget, and last night at the school committee meeting, David was able to present some updates on some cost analysis that he had done, and we can certainly discuss it. I know you have transportation on your list. We recommended and approved with school committee last night the opportunity to level fund that transportation contract, thus basically reducing our budget request by the 132,589, bringing it to the number you see there, the 5.1 million, the 5.57% increase. I can speak a little bit to that. Let me go through that change and we can circle back. So we had carried a 4.3% index increase on the bus contract, and we are moving forward to attempt and basically level funding that contract. We can talk about that when we come to back to transportation. The other change we made was that we looked at the warrant article request for the HVAC system at Hastings. David has also continued since our work on the budget in the fall, working with Leah and continuing to look at our existing warrant articles. We have several that had remained open, that had funding access left in them. After talking with the school committee, we're forwarding a request to basically to reappropriate those remaining funds to bring down the cost of the HVAC request. So that's not debt authorization, those are actually articles where we have borrowed that funding and it's remaining funding sitting in open warrant articles. So in looking at these two articles, there is, if you look at those numbers, I just have to pull them apart a little bit for you. Hang on. Yeah, it is the older one. Sorry, I'm losing my mind. Sorry, wait a minute. There we go. I'm feeling better now. I'm like, where are those numbers? I know, I apologize. I'm like, wait a minute, I had the real numbers in there. I lost my footing for a second. So we had two remaining. We had the surplus funds available from the Armstrong modular project, where we took those out and we put in the addition that was from town meeting to 2018. There's remaining $145,924 in that warrant article. And in the Hastings renovation pre-K edition, Article 5 from 2017, there is $360,145. We would be basically looking to offset the impact cost request of the borrow for the gap in the HVAC funding and utilize releasing those funds back to draw that down. I think that has a couple advantages in the sense that if it gets funded by the ARPA funds, it would then make some leverage of more ARPA funding available to cross more departments and more opportunities in that funding. And that we will just make more funding available overall. So spend some time looking at whether we were comfortable releasing those funds, because we have other expenditures that could fall within the warrant language, but decided this was a more advantageous and appropriate use given the fiscal restraints that everybody is looking at. And those are the two changes voted and accepted last night by school committee. So,
Can you walk, I don't want to interrupt you.
no,
but
go, that's fine.
I want to stay with this for a minute, if
Sure.
you don't mind.
Yep.
2 years ago, 3 years ago, we had an issue with using funds from previous articles.
Yep.
You're not suggesting this is the same, this is something different?
Well, there's a couple pieces about this. That was reauthorization of debt, in terms of the opportunity to borrow. It was borrowing authorization. It wasn't money that had been borrowed yet, and so it hadn't yet impacted the debt. And so it was a reallocation of the debt authorization. And these are funds that are already borrowed, already carried in debt, and are sitting as remaining funds available in those two warrant articles.
Okay.
So,
I hate to disagree, but
yeah,
the finance director has told me multiple times, we don't borrow until we actually have a need for the cash. So what we're
Right.
really doing is, we're not changing the total spending, we're not changing the price we're gonna pay for installing the HVAC. What we're doing is we're relinquishing some borrowing authority, which is
Well,
okay, it's nothing, I mean,
right,
that is a
right. No,
typical way
right.
things are done.
yeah.
We need, I mean, the taxpayers need to understand, we're not reducing how much money we're gonna spend to put an HVAC system in. We're spending the same amount of money, we're just relinquishing some approval to borrow that we didn't need to borrow because for some reason we had gotten more approval to borrow than we needed. Okay, we really don't have the money in the treasury someplace, because we don't borrow it till we need it.
Well, I agree with you, Hank, but in this case, the 145,924 and the 300,061.45 has been borrowed already and are unexpended funds that we're carrying in our debt. So they are actual funds that Leah already borrowed for. We built the projects and we had remaining funds. So again, I totally agree with you. I mean, I think whenever there's debt authorization, that's one thing. We haven't borrowed that money yet, and it doesn't really exist in the debt impact. In this case, we need to go to the town, and we're requesting that the town vote to authorize the amount for the school department of the $1,835,327, which is the gap in funding for the HVA system. And if they vote that, we will go and borrow that amount, and we will do the remaining part of the project. We have bids, we have a gap that's established based upon actual numbers. And our suggestion here is that there are funds that are already sitting in these two remaining warrant articles that we would close out and revert against that total request. So it's real money that we don't have to borrow, that makes that request to the town $1,329,000. So it's definitely real money we don't then borrow. I think it's certainly advantageous to do that. It lowers the debt impact by, like $500,000, and that's a real savings in the impact of the debt. So, it's certainly something supported by Leah and supported by Christie as a viable and appropriate way to lower the impact of debt authorization that we're bringing to town meeting. So
And if ARPA funds it?
if ARPA funds it, it means that ARPA would fund a lower amount, thus leaving more of that 5.6 million available to go for
Okay.
other
All right.
costs.
Just wanted to- yeah,
So,
got it.
either way, we close out those articles against this need and in effect release those funds available to have better impact across other projects.
Okay.
So this is language that I ran by Christie. She helped me develop it. It's not, she really worked with me on it. It is clean. These are funds that we already have. They're sitting in these warrant articles that have been borrowed, and we would use them to offset this request.
Walter, you have a question?
You asked it sort of partially. I just wanted to know, the thing with the ARPA is, so now your request for ARPA is the lower number?
Right.
1.3 or something.
And the article itself basically says we need 1.3 million to finish this project. And if ARPA doesn't fund it, the town has authorized the borrow with this vote. And if ARPA does fund it, then we won't need to make the borrow. I mean, I think it's a project that potentially will be funded by ARPA, but again, I think the consultants that we're working with at the town level will have to see that through the capital process. And I think you have 2 articles from us that basically say these have been approved to move forward from the capital committee through the process. Hopefully they would be carried by ARPA, or otherwise we would be voting to authorize the borrow.
Do any of the finance committee members who are remote have any questions on this?
Yes. Is this more, in terms of an accounting process, the equivalent of a transfer between line items? Because you have the money in different accounts?
If you read the language of the article, it's to reallocate the surplus funds from the one warrant article against this new article, yes. That's exactly what the language does. It reallocates surplus funds, money that we have, that we've borrowed that is sitting there, to lower the request for this article. It's actually a pretty clean request in the sense that the money has already been borrowed. We've closed those projects. And, in looking at it, it feels like an appropriate way to contribute towards a less impactful number.
Beth, is your question a process question? Are you thinking that there's some paperwork that we have to deal with on
Well,
this?
no, but what I'm thinking is that my issue with, the way I was first hearing it was, we had a failure at town meeting when it was take money that we approved to borrow and move it to a new purpose. And, I don't want another failure at town meeting because of the process that we're putting the money together rather than the purpose that the money is for. And so I was wondering if it had, if reframing it to that it's more like a line, a transfer between accounts than borrowing money that was approved for something else. I mean, because
Beth, it might be better to let the finance director and the town manager and our legal counsel make sure that the wording in the article is appropriate to accomplish the objective we have in mind, and we just focus on the objective.
But we know that what happened at town meeting, we were part of the people that caused.
I understand, Beth. We had an argument about the way the article was written on the town meeting floor, and it ended up being a debate that was more a fire than knowledge, because we had a bunch of folks arguing about legal things and accounting principles who really didn't have the background to engage in that argument.
I think that, I think you're all stating facts of things that happened, and everyone's accurate here. I think that the subtle difference, Beth, is that, again, we were trying to reallocate authorization to borrow. That's different than funding that's remaining at the end of a project that we're using to basically lower the ask. So
Right.
it's
So
money
that-
that's sitting there. If
think
you want me to
in-
keep it, I'll keep it. I mean, if you want me to revert the article and keep the funds, I will. I'm not opposed to that. This is a goodwill gesture of clarity that I could leave, those are funds that have been expended. I could utilize them against within the span of what the warrant article allows against other expenditures, it's cleaner to close those out, put them against this ask and lower the request, because the
I-
next is a real debt authorization borrow that will be real money
I-
we have to borrow.
I
very
don't,
much-
I know the article, I'm sorry, Beth, go ahead.
I very much, want the article to be able to go forward without being caught in the fire trap. So, I'm thinking about it from how do we make the wording clear that this is a good thing so that people don't.
Well,
Yeah.
the real discussion at that meeting, as I recall it, yes, there were some legal and technical issues with the wording of the article, but the real discussion was whether or not the project should be judged based on their merit and not by automatically transferring funds to execute an article, because it seemed to bypass that whole question of an article standing on its own merit. So that's where I think the real circumstances were coming from. And, the technical, legal issue just added weight to that, and that's why it was rejected. I agree with Hank. Let's let the finance director, let's let the town council and the town manager go through this, and let's see what happens, and then we'll circle back to it if we have to.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a very brief amount of time. I'll submit both pieces of language to review. I mean, again, in my mind, this was something that certainly makes sense to us, and I'm also happy to retain the finances of those articles and make the full request. So, I think it's important that it come to the floor with your support. We've been clear, and the Capital Committee has supported as well, as has Christie, that we really want to focus in school committee firmly on finalizing the project completions of the things that need to be done at Hastings. And I think everyone has supported that this gap funding is logical against the other warrant articles, which are already approved and sitting there ready to go. And we have a bid project ready to go, and we have a gap in funding. That's all very clean, and I think just asking for less money feels logical to me. And, if that doesn't make sense, I'm certainly happy to revert to the other language. Again, I think everyone's working to be creative and to be in goodwill towards the purposes of keeping all of the asks as low as possible. So we've been spending a lot of time working on that and coming to you with decisions that say, fine, you've all approved this 1.8 million, we think you can ask for 1.3. If people don't want to do that, I'm not going to argue against myself. I'm not going to negotiate against myself. So you need to decide what you want the level of the article to be and tell me. I'm not going to negotiate that number. I want to try to do the best to ask for the smaller number that would be possible.
I think our response is, let's let this play through the
Sure.
review process and then see where we are.
I agree.
What we really need to recognize is, the question a town meeting ought to deal with is, are we willing to spend $3.8 million to upgrade the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system at Hastings? If the answer is yes, fine, well, let's go do it.
I
If it's
agree.
not, then we ought to say, well, we don't want to spend that amount of money.
Right.
I mean, that's the key question. The funding mechanisms are really kind of a technicality.
Again, I don't want to have to argue it on town meeting floor either.
Right, I
so
agree.
Trust me, I agree with you. I just think being in front of FinCom is different than being on town meeting floor. And the difference between authorization for debt and real money sitting there is a clarity I think you track well. And so, again, I think understanding the logic of it, I agree with you, Hank, that do we want to spend that on this project or not is really the presentation point that we would make.
Let's move on.
Sure. I mean, this is the kind of stuff we want to iron out. The clock is ticking, so I agree, and I wanted to bring it to you, and I feel good about it, and I want to make sure that, you do as well. So, that's the one piece around that article, and then I think when you look at the other pieces, I'm going to just take us back to the slide I had been looking at, which was the look at the change in the level funding at a 4.3% carry. increase, and we would be basically level funding that, and we would reduce the 132,589 that was voted as acceptable to school committee last night based upon Dave's presentation of the rationale, and it brings us to this number, which I sent to Christy this morning.
Would
So
you
you want-
still use the community education money to offset the remainder after you've
That's
level
already
funded
in
that?
there.
It's in there already?
It's already in there,
Okay.
yeah, yep. It just lets you know that that's already
Okay.
inclusive of those. And do you want to talk about transportation a little bit?
I actually am very pleased to hear that you're going to level fund that contract,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
figured that would
personally. I
be,
mean,
Yeah, let me just clarify. My understanding is that the contract as written actually has an escalation clause in it, so the cost per unit for buses is going up in accordance with the escalation, but you've somehow found a way to use less, to reduce the transportation services to offset the increase in the price per unit of transportation, which is what I think folks were looking for. That's my understanding of what you're telling us, and that seems to make sense.
we're good. I think we're good to go on this one.
okay.
Is that accurate? I mean, that's what
Yes.
happened?
But let me
Just
just,
wanted to make sure.
Beth, Paul, or Andrew, any questions on excuse me, transportation?
No, thank you.
Okay.
All right, let's see, so I'm thinking toward some of the things we had wanted to continue to look at around, you know, our focus on being clear that we recognize that funding schools is expensive, that it is a cost to communities, that is a hard hit. And I also want to make sure that we're clear and articulate that that's the funding mechanism in Massachusetts, and that's how public schooling is funded, and we live here and work here, and we remain very cost-effective against our comparative towns. We've continued to try to work on looking at that funding mechanism, so we went to another source. We actually went to the Department of Revenue and looked, so just trying to cross-reference our numbers against the other bar graphs. This one kind of cross-references similarly to the others we've shared with you, that this looks at the total percentage of the town, the educational costs in town budgets. So Daniel and David worked on this. If you have questions, we can talk about it. But currently, Westborough's educational costs are about 53% of the town budget. And that's about, you can see, we're certainly chasing similar numbers to our like communities. So, you know, again, we're not saying it's a comfortable number, I understand, but we're providing a strong and appropriate education, and I think at a very cost-effective structure in comparison to our colleagues. And as we emphasized when we met earlier, with more complex kids than many of them have. So, you know, again, I think from that standpoint, we went back in and looked at our numbers and continue to feel that they represent a district that we feel is providing good service delivery for the cost. So I thought this was an interesting one. Again, we're trying to earnestly listen to thoughts people have and then come back with like cross-referencing with different types of benchmarks.
You have anything?
You know, I think the important thing, one of the things that I've noticed causes some confusion with folks when they look at benchmarks is and this is where the source of the data is. What's one really important thing about any particular benchmark is that the measuring criteria are uniform for all of the entries in the benchmark.
Right.
It's part of the nature of this whole data gathering and benchmarking process that data source to data source, the numbers don't always compare. This set of numbers is, you know, you've got the Mass Department of Revenue who's saying, hey, the way we measure education cost, these are comparable numbers. May not be the same as the way other folks might want to measure education cost. So we need to understand where we're picking 53%. if one were to use a different data source, it
Sure.
might come out to be 60%. Or if one
Sure.
were to include different expenses in that
Right.
data source, people particularly get into difficulty because they get confused by, is the data source we're using
Right,
the levy cost, or is it the total spending, or is it the total spending with allocations for non-school department controlled expenses?
right. No, I
you-
agree with you. I think it
You know,
is,
you-
it's a natural question to want comparison, and it's complicated to get the right data points that you want to feel confident you're seeing what you want to see. I think that we've tried to adopt, I think, an interesting approach, which is one, something important that we did several years ago was standardize the communities so that they weren't changing, and we could watch them over time. I think that was a good shift, and again, shepherded by AFC's thoughts and guidance. I think that it is helpful, given that all of the different sites use different ways to sort numbers, that looking at a lot of them, you get kind of cross-referenced relative comparisons. So to your point, Hank, I think as you look across this metric, they standardized it for what they're looking at, and we fall about in the lower, like the top of the lower third, right? So then you look at the next one, and we kind of fall the same way. So if you cross-reference enough data points,
Right.
you get a generalization, which is, we tend to fall, we're in comparison, when we're looking at relative costs, we tend to be just on the lower side of the middle in most of those reference points. So we can keep shaking the data points and look for different ways that people are sorting it to build confidence over time. I mean, this was one that Daniel and David said, well, let's go to the Department of Revenue and not the education people. They might be biased, like hop over there and look at the numbers there. So trying to, in good faith, recognize
Right.
that and bring you different opportunities to see our data cross-referenced for you. So I just thought this was an interesting one, and again, an opportunity to reiterate to you, certainly we didn't pop up as an anomaly, which I think is good.
I was all over the DESI site looking for information, and it's impossible. As far
You
that's-
have to spend a
That was
lot.
my opinion. It was absolute, almost insanity, and I'm sitting there after an hour saying, this is a waste of time.
You have to, well, Daniel and
I've been
David.
doing it for
Yeah.
15 years, so if you
Yeah.
want a tutorial, I'll help you, but you're right.
Yeah,
Just
it's-
Pop in there is
Yeah.
insane without,
Yeah.
like,
What I would like you guys to provide to the committee is a copy of the latest submission to DESI.
You mean the,
Whatever when do you file it? January for the previous fiscal year or previous calendar year? Or you do it in the fall for the
yeah,
previous
it's
fiscal year?
October, well, there's two, yeah, I'll let you guys speak to it.
Whatever the last one was that you guys filed, that would be great.
Yeah.
Closest, Thank you.
Yeah.
Again,
Oh, look.
to me, one of the important considerations is that the absolute value of these numbers may be off by some amount. But but the comparison from town to town is dead on accurate. The absolute value may not be 53%, it may be 55, or it may be 52. There's a fairly wide error range on the absolute values. But on the relative values, the comparison, we are clearly more cost-effective than Sherburne and Northborough and Sharon and a number of other places, right?
Right.
The other thing that folks don't have to take into account is, I'm reasonably familiar with Sudbury. Sudbury has almost no commercial base. So, the school, because there's no commercial revenue coming into their town, even if the schools are spending the same amount of money educating their students as we do, their percentage is gonna be higher because they don't have the revenue source. So you can't just look at, the absolute numbers don't tell the story. It's the comparison that makes sense. We are cost effective. There's a number of other metrics that you've shown us
Yeah.
where we're in the middle of the pack, if you will, in a positive sense. I believe from memory, when we've looked at performance numbers, a variety of what I'll call educational performance metrics, graduation rates and MCAS scores and any number of, we tend to be in the upper quartiles. From a financial perspective, we're somewhere in the middle or the lower half. From a performance perspective, we're in the third or fourth quarter, which is just a really great story for our schools. The schools are doing a good job of, given the task that they're asked to perform, they're doing a great job.
So I know one of your questions, Hank, was about the benchmark districts. And so I have a memo that you can take a look at here that summarizes the committee that came together. It was after the 2018 annual town meeting where Christy Williams was a member of the committee, Lisa Edinburgh, Ian Johnson, Shelby Marshall, myself and Amber, and we sat down and we basically came up with the benchmark communities by using different criteria, and there were some communities that the fire department and police department wanted to see in here because of what, they had similar types of equipment and systems in place, and the roads and the infrastructure and such was similar to our town. And there were other ones that were more relevant for the school system in terms of the quality and the demographic diversity of the school systems. And so at the end of the day, we took the numbers, we were looking at MCAS scores, SATs, AP scores, and enrollment and diversity of our school population and the fire. And, like I said, police and DPW had other interests. And so what you see here is there's some towns that, you would say those aren't comparable to us in terms of academic performance, but there are several that are, but there are towns in there that have, what is it that we have on our 911 system? It's the EMTs. And so some systems have EMTs, and so we wanted to make sure to have those. Anyhow, you can see there's some trade-offs in the comparison groups, but this is what, after going back and forth, we settled on, and so just so you have it for history.
Yep, great. Give it to Mike.
And it's interesting too, because I actually started we started it the year before with Jim. So we actually.
I'm sorry, Amber, I didn't hear you.
Sorry, we started it with the year before with Jim Malloy, and then we finished it up here. And Jim actually did a great job to pull a lot of metrics, and he built this giant, I think we shared it in one of the links for you, a really giant spreadsheet that had all the municipality costs and data, and we used it to kind of hone it down in the working meetings. Actually, I think it's a really nice piece of work and has, I think, stabilized some of our conversations effectively over time. And I think the town choices, I know Franklin's in there for the fire department and a couple places that rank very high in their similar benchmarks. So I think it's worked well for us so that you don't feel like you're trying to track different towns with each department.
Any questions from Beth, Paul, or? Sorry.
Yes, I have a question.
Andrew? Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
This is Paul. I'm sorry if I missed this at the beginning, but just so I'm clear, or the base is different, but are these numbers still excluding things like debt, healthcare, and other expenses that aren't paid out of the school budget? This is strictly school budget?
Paul, do you mean the per pupil expenditure number is inclusive of the healthcare cost, but doesn't include town debt? And that's true across.
Sorry.
Did I answer?
Okay, per pupil. Okay. I was thinking of the percentages. You were showing the percent of
Yeah, this
budget.
one here.
Right.
This is, so I don't know, Daniel, this percentage number is the percentage of the actual, the school budgets. Like, so for example, if you look at ours similarly, our percentage right now is 53% of the total pie graph of the town. And that isn't, and the healthcare costs are in another chunk.
This is not an all, I mean, the 53% is not an all-in number.
No.
Okay,
No.
again, I've spent a bit of time looking at the numbers and.
Right, it is in the, when
But
you
it-
shift to the, that's a great, if you were looking at the pie graph that, Christie presents of the total town budget,
No.
right now, the school budget, again, not inclusive of the part of the total revenue that she shows for the health coverage costs, But our, you know, again, the per pupil expenditure, when you look at that average, Paul, that does, when you look at these numbers, these are driven by the per pupil expenditure allocations, and those are inclusive of comparison of, including health
Right,
costs.
and again, the value of the graph is comparing ourselves to others, not the absolute point value of the
Yes.
number.
Right.
Okay, you
The
can't
general
take, you
trend.
can't take the point value of the number and use it to make decisions.
Right.
You can take the
That's-
comparison town to town, and you can use those numbers to make decisions and judgments. That is,
Yes.
and that's true whether you're talking
Sorry,
about schools or any
one
other
word in.
benchmarking
Yes.
activity. In benchmarking, you can only use it for a comparison. You can't use the absolute numbers because you're not gonna get comparable numbers on every benchmark.
Paul, did I hear you with a question?
Yes, I just want to make the point that, you know, it's not always apples to apples. The proportions among the towns may be different. We don't know what they are, and it may still fall in the middle, but we shouldn't say just because we've looked at it across different bases, if it's mainly based on operating expenses, that's the only theoretical comparison, even if it's not practical. But that's enough. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Paul. I mean, again, I think we're all saying the same thing. Each of these give us different slices of a complete picture, and you have to take the complete picture, because any one of these slices, you can only take it for the merit of this exact comparison, and it can't be generalized against the other graphs.
Has there been any discussion about when you're going to review this list again?
I mean, it's a joint effort. When we did it before, it was AFC, Selectmen, and all of us. If
Yeah,
you want to sit down and look at it again, we could certainly
Not,
review it.
not right now, but at some point, we probably will, because we've had a demographic change in Westborough over the last 10 years, but we don't know how much of it has impacted the last 5.
No, I mean, the demographic changes in Westborough in the last 10 years have not been substantial on a percentage basis.
10% of
I
the
mean,
population?
no, I mean, we've had a substantial increase in the population, but the distribution amongst different categories of people, people's identification as to being, racial identifications, ethnic identifications, age distributions, et cetera, they're not that different in the 2021 census than they were in the 2020 census and the 2010 census.
I'm
I mean,
not
I've
so
looked
sure
at the
that
numbers.
based on-
Well, I've looked at the numbers, okay, and the percentage distribution numbers have not changed dramatically.
Okay, we'll at some point come to a
Sure.
recognition that we've got to look at these comparatives
I
again.
mean, they're only as valuable as they reassure
Well,
you,
yeah,
yeah.
in terms of, again, this is a process that we developed upon request by AFC to give comparable comparison information. So, I mean, you've been here, Hank, through all of these, and there was this request to not, to stabilize the kind of annual data we showed you so we could look at trends over time, to stabilize, not asking you to look at too much because you have to look at so much all the time. So it was a collaborative effort on the part of the select board and the school committee to respond to AFC's request to stabilize our data. And if it no longer functions for you, we're happy to come back together and talk it through, because, we want to make sure that it serves its purpose for you.
I'm not sure if the exact towns matter as much as the fact that you use similar ones, because then nobody's accused of cherry picking.
Right.
I picked these 5 towns because it made Westboro look inexpensive, or made it look expensive, depending on your point of view.
Right, there's a
So-
good bell curve
so-
here of expense. I mean, you've got
Yeah.
Lexington and, which is very expensive and probably one of the 2 top performing districts oftentimes in the benchmarks that we look against. And Franklin is a very different community. And so, you've got a nice mix. We can never figure out how Belmont manages to do what Belmont does. Their numbers always, look very advantageous. So it's hard to know.
Okay,
All
let's
right.
move on.
So we're kind of meandering through questions that help you to decide, your support around the budget is why we're here. I'm wondering what else I can answer. I mean, I think we had transportation, we've talked about, the benchmark communities. Hank, do you want to keep pushing on things you want to go through?
Amber, just maybe clarify what the intention is in terms of ARPA funding. Not the dollars, but what kind of ARPA funding, where will the school plan on applying ARPA funding when it's available? Are you going to apply it mostly to one-time capital expenditures? Is it going to be applied mostly to operating expenses? And what's the rationale behind that judgment?
Sure. So there's two avenues of funding that, emerged over the pandemic. The ARPA funding was distributed to the town, and so Westborough received, I think, help me out, $5.6 million to distribute against projects that would fall within the criteria for ARPA consideration and funding. The money's already here, it's already allocated, the amount is available in terms of like knowing what it is. And then we're working with the consultants at the town level. It's really not, it's not a trajectory that, I or we are in necessarily control of. We're participants in it all together, and we submitted we submitted several for consideration for ARPA funding that we felt met the criteria that the capital committee established, and 2 were surfaced as ones that we wanted to give the strongest consideration to, the chiller system and the HVAC system. I think that's, all of it's gonna have to play out, I'm not quite sure. And so that is being managed by Kim Foster in collaboration with the boards, and we all submitted things to her, and now that finance subcommittee is looking at criteria, and Mike sits on that committee. The other avenue of funding was the COVID ESSER relief money.
Okay.
So when you look at the, see if I can back myself up here to the ESSER relief money. I have it in here. Stick with me.
So if could, I mean,
So we.
my understanding of what you're telling me is ARPA funding per se is not being applied against the operating budget for the schools in 2023. It's being applied, it's potentially going to be applied against capital spending if the projects are approved, but not against the operating budget.
So, here we go. So, the,
Right,
So you-
it's ESSER, right.
yeah. So the ARPA funds are for capital expenditure projects, and that's in the avenue with Kim and all the boards looking at it, working with the consultants they've hired. The ESSER funds, which was COVID relief funds, we received ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. There was an immediate infusion in FY, Daniel, help me out, it was FY 1920, where there's some initial emergency funds, and then that was like ESSER 1, and it was a short burst of money to kind of cope with getting PPE gear and stuff, and some immediate decisions. Then ESSER 2 and 3 came through. This is ESSER 3, and what we articulated was that we utilized half of it for FY 23, and we're staging, holding the 341 so that we can stage the movement of either releasing or maintaining the additional COVID staffing that it's covering. And that's being used for staffing support for paras, tutors, and teachers to maintain class sizes at a lower level through the FY23 recovery from pandemic. It stabilized numbers that we'll continue to track, and we would be then making any proposals that there would be positions that could rotate out, or ones that would need to come into budget. This will allow us actually right now to maintain that FTE support through FY24 as well without budget impact. So that's the funds you're referencing, Hank.
Yep, good, thank you very much.
Yep.
Did we get a reopening grant from the feds in fiscal '21?
A reopening grant.
I just came across that data when I was wandering through the DESI site. It was $849,150. Okay.
Yeah.
That could be. I thought when I first saw it that it was one of the ESSER.
I think that number was the 834,000 one, was that ESSER one?
ESSER one was 30-some-odd thousand.
And then it was like immediate relief just to kind of get through purchasing, like that happened in 19 and 20. And that was a short burst of fund when we closed in March through the close of the year. And that was to help get technology things under control and to be able to run virtually.
Yeah.
And then we got ESSER 2 in FY 21-22, and now ESSER 3 in 22-23.
Yeah, when I saw it,
Sorry, 21-22.
yeah, when I saw it, it just stuck out because I don't remember that size of a grant being talked about, and certainly it would have been over the last 2 budget cycles.
That's ESSER 2. That number was, I believe, and we'll have to go back and look. This is the kind of stuff that makes me nervous. I want to be on record as
Amber,
saying,
believe me, I'm not trying to make you nervous
no,
by
I
doing that.
know. It makes
I
me
just-
nervous when I'm trying to answer questions succinctly for
Yeah,
you, and I don't
that's
want
fine.
people to watch
appreciate
being
that.
like, God, she has no idea where $800,000 is. So let's
No.
all be clear
I'm not
before
saying-
I'm held accountable at a level
Yeah.
which makes me uncomfortable. Okay?
Especially since you're on record,
And
too.
I'm on record here, standing here, trying to be open and affirming and
You're
supportive.
doing fine, Amber, thank you.
So the ESSER 2 funds, I believe, and Mike, I can feel them crunching back there, was an $800,000 number. That was used for PPE gear, it was used for staffing. We've now then received ESSER 3, which you can see we've kind of hung on to as much of it as we can to utilize into next year and the year beyond. So that was ESSER 2, and we used it to cover, I know exactly what, it's coming back, you'll find it. ESSER 2 was used to cover all the subs we had, all of the extra staffing we had to hire, because we had to hire a whole second group of teachers to teach the virtual while we had people at home, and then we had to hire subs for them. So we had that whole middle tier of people who existed for FY 21. I think I have PTSD around this. 2020, 2021, the year of the pandemic, for the full year. Those funds, that 800,000 was used to pay for staffing. And some PPE gear that didn't get covered by FEMA. It was used to cover renting Teamworks, so we could provide daycare. It was used to run some extra busing for that, and it was used for staffing. And I know we could pull the exact penny delineage of that amount. And that was utilized to manage FY 2021. We expended all of those funds by the end of the year, and then they delineated the arrival of ESSER 3. We used ESSER 2 funds also to provide some additional summer school support, I believe, when we did some reopening. So all of those funds we submitted, and you have to delineate what the payments are.
Thank you,
So that's where all of that money went, and you're right, it was about 800,000.
thank you.
Yep, and you can see that ESSER 3 here is a pretty big number as well. And I think because the need for emergency staffing, we had a whole slew of people that kind of came and went in FY 2021. This number, we were able to more advantageously space over fiscal 23 and 24, and I think will help us, have some budget savings.
It wasn't ESSER, it was COVID reopening funds.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
There
Yeah.
we go.
okay.
All right, thank you. I was waiting for the backup to, I was waiting for the backup to swing in.
I would have been happy to wait until tomorrow or Monday for my answer. I mean, it's
That's
not,
okay.
Block that hour.
Lock it, okay, thank you.
I'm just trying to
folks,
get it
for-
over with, that's right.
Thank you.
Okay, that makes me feel like, I hope you feel like relieved that my memory is working. Okay, so Hank, here's the remaining support funds, and we're going to get 2 years of advantageous use from them.
Yeah, and again, from my perspective, looking at what we're doing, we're using non-tax levy funding to almost $1 million
Right.
to offset our unusual spending, and that's a good, positive thing to do. It's not,
Yeah, yeah,
But at the same time, with the government, the ESSER government funding, we're not trying to spend it all in 1 year. We understand that the impacts have multiple years, and we're saving some of it to sustain our level of excellence through into the next fiscal year.
yeah.
Good thing to do.
Yes, and I think, I certainly recognize that, kind of feel like everyone is recovering from where we've been and hoping that we head forward in a more normal way. And I think then they're like, wasn't there a lot of money and where did it go? So it's logical. I know those questions, swirl out there. So, okay. Other questions?
You have any more,
I'm all set.
Walter?
Yeah, I have one question with the circuit breaker gap. I was wondering if there's a way to know whether that is mostly caused by increases in the amount of tuition for a student, or have we increased the number of students that are above the circuit breaker threshold? Or
Yeah, that's a great-
mix, or
Right,
just
right.
some
That's a
data
great.
behind that?
So I'll try to be succinct. Circuit breaker gives you back a percentage of allocation against your total expenditures of tuition, 75%. If you look at this slide in the year that we're using the FY21. There's also always a gap because the circuit breaker is a reimbursement for expenditures of tuitions that you were managing during FY21. And you're now in FY23, and there's always a gap between the number of students you have outplaced and the cost of tuitions. And it's a combination of both. In some years, the circuit breaker gap has been smaller because we were able to bring some students back in and our tuition costs were lower, or there was a less, smaller escalation in costs to the annual tuition increases. I think, so this number is a gap that represents an increase in the number of students we have outplaced, as well as some tuition increases. I think we're going to suffer. So there's a couple things, which is those students the increase in those students being outplaced, we will see a bump in circuit breaker, but there's always going to be a lag. So I would imagine that FY22 circuit breaker will come in at a higher rate and would be applied against FY24. We'll keep our fingers crossed. And, I mean, logically it should. We have that much more cost outplaced, and we're going to get a percentage of it. So we should see a bump. I think it's important for people to understand that right now the impact cost for outplacement, a lot of districts are struggling with. One, they can't get students into outplacements. There's long waiting lists. There's escalations in costs. They're facing staffing shortages, and it's leading to just a whole cascade of complications that is just very sad for students that are struggling, because the vast majority of those tend to be students that are struggling emotionally. And in some, we've really got incredibly strong programming across a whole array of complexities that students struggle with. But I think we're seeing an increase in some of those mental health challenges. And sometimes that's combined with students who also have learning difficulties. And, it can just, we're trying to scramble as best we can always to keep upgrading our programming on site. And for students that need to be outplaced, a lot of them are in a holding pattern. So it's something we worry through. The money becomes a secondary worry, but, mostly you're thinking about kind of people that you're hoping to get in the right spot so you can support them.
And since the reimbursement, even though it's 2 years late, is only going to be 70 to 75% of the amount, there's always a gap if your number increases, right? I mean, the 25% of it, by definition, is
gonna-
got to go up.
Right.
Right.
I would just add that that's exactly true. The 70, 75%
speakers on mic, please, without
Oh,
repeating?
yeah.
Oh, sorry, yes, David.
David was, I can recap, he was indicating that you often have then the unanticipated tuition placements where, people move in town, and so you might have not anticipated, because we also do projections for anticipated tuitions, and so it's a big financial arm of the work, and it has these unexpected impacts at times for us. In terms of students we didn't anticipate. That works both ways for us. There's been years when we've brought students back in, and over the last several years, as we've stabilized and built programs, Borough being another example, we've been able to return students and have financial offsets that are very advantageous, that control this number, and that continues to be true. But I think that again, we continue to lobby. You see a lot of effective lobbying and efforts to continue to articulate the need that they fully fund education for Chapter 70. And they're kind of silent on circuit breaker, but it's a big number that, again, they fall to different sides. This is a direct offset for us. And Chapter 70 goes into the general fund on the town side. So it gets more visibility just because I think more people are aware of that number. This one just starts as initial deficit offset for us when we're starting budgeting. But, I think it'd be interesting, and Dave and I will do this. Dave, we should just look at the last 10 years and see what the gap is. It would be interesting to follow the trend, and, we've been doing more of that. Dave's been doing some, just as he's kind of analyzed our past work, being able to look at just some interesting ways of our financial trends to see if there's things we can learn. So, we can look at the general trend of that number over 10 budget cycles. It would just be interesting to look at it.
I'm all set.
Paul, Beth, Andrew, any questions?
No, thank you.
Melanie Board sent me a question that she wanted to run by you folks, and that's how often as an organization do you analyze inefficiencies or waste within your system? Now, we had a very candid and I think excellent discussion with the school committee, and I know that one of the points they made was that they felt that we were, as a school system, operating very efficiently. So it just, kind of begged the question, how often do you look at those things?
I think we're continually looking at every budget cycle for where we can have cost savings. So, like annually, every year, like I sit with the director, Stevens, and Dr. Stevens and I look at the placement of all of our paraeducators, all 100 of them, and look to ways we can consolidate, get more opportunities to, consolidate them and save a health coverage and hire one teacher instead of 3 paras. We did like a consolidation 2 years ago and leverage some cost savings in our planning. We're always, pushing hard on getting advantageous service contracts. I think that we look at, like, in 2 cycles ago, we reduced the cost that we were carrying for trash and electricity, level funded those, and just tightened down tracking ways that we could have savings there. So it is a regular part of the way these discussions drive, looking to be effective, but we do it on our own as well, to just kind of, we're self-aware that we're looking to come in as advantageously as possible when we come to the town.
I think some of that question was directed to, do you look at your processes as well as your operations? I know, David, you were talking at one point earlier this year about when you were looking to hire that one additional person, you were looking at your processes, I think. So I think that's where Melanie was headed with some of this. Are you looking at those things?
Yeah, I think one additive that is important is that, there's also a process related to the modeling. Every year when we start the budget process, essentially you can roll over budgets, but then you want to ascertain are they appropriate, but you want to, a unique way to look at it is kind of with the zero-based budgeting, is having departments actually build from the bottom up based on needs and have those needs be supported by the data. So that's something that, we're considering to do in a lot of ways, as opposed to just rolling budget forward. This, a perfect example of that would be transportation. So efficiency is critical. And again, we don't want to just actually roll the number forward and give everything a 2% increase based on inflation or cost of living or whatnot, or what we see in the market. But for us, there's a thorough process related to all areas, whether it's staffing, operations, facilities would be a great one to look at, especially with green initiatives and things like that. So, we're taking, we're taking a full collective look at everything that we do and saying, are we being efficient? And if there's opportunities for reassessment, it's really driven on data and statistics that would allow us to make modifications so we're not impacting service to students.
Well, if you ever decide to try zero-based budgeting, you will have an advocate on this side of the podium. I'm very much in favor of that.
In past districts, we've done it. It's one of those ships that you turn slowly in a district.
Very slowly.
But personally, I think it's rewarding.
I think to complement that and to the way we've looked at this, I mean, when we got the new budget, when we got the new contract for busing, we went back in and looked at the mileage calculations and looked at estimated use of mileage over multiple years and came back and reduced that in the first, we brought that contract down by 300,000 when based upon the initial awarding of the contract, and have maintained that. And, again, we'll level fund it now and track where we can get savings in not paying double runs, things like that. Like, we're always kind of squeezing those costs. I also think, I'm comfortable with us looking at the building-based budgets, and we look at, asking them to take hard looks at things, and we basically have spent the last several years kind of turning down requests and level funding them, and their budgets have not gone up. So, I think certainly inflation and cost of living and all the things that happen to people that live in homes happen to people in schools as well. And so all of our expenses are going up. And so we really are looking to maintain, and if you think we haven't really increased any of those costs, it's going to catch us at some point, but we'll see.
Are you experiencing any stress given the current inflation?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
am.
I
That's
meant-
so
I
kind
should
of
have
you to
said-
ask.
I should have said budget stress.
Sorry, it was so perfect. I just had to
Yeah,
do it.
thank
But go
you.
ahead.
Are you folks experiencing any budget stress in the current budget year because of the inflation pressures?
So, yes, there's a couple areas of concern that we're trying to start to track right now. We just got a bunch of bus submissions, and, we'll see where they are and what the costs are there. But services are higher, contracted services are much higher. That's really hitting us. For example, we haven't filled the electrician position that we vacated. We've been using contracted services, and it's 4 times the cost. I mean, it's incredible. We need to get an electrician, but, we were trying to, again, cost savings. So yes, we're seeing some of those escalations, materials, those types of things. We haven't had we don't have any large purchases coming up, like textbooks or something like that could really hit us hard, that we're not in cycle for that. But our general cost escalations, are there. Do you have any others that we've been looking at? I mean, right now,
Sorry.
Related to materials and supplies, or O&M, everything that Superintendent Bach listed, maybe a dotted line, there's pressure or stresses related to some, like human capital. So she mentioned the electrician, food service, we're having some hard time staffing there, the facilities with the electrician, but also, facility staff, maintenance. So we're trying to be innovative. We're seeing what other districts are doing. We're considering, innovative approaches to try to recruit staff. But as Superintendent mentioned, O&M, everything that happens in the market, you're aware of, so we're feeling those. But again, a slight tangent would be is that the stress related to, staffing, and then, as leaders in the district, we worry about burnout because people are going above and beyond, which I think is a credit to the district. But at the same time, when you're short-staffed, it means someone has to do that much more, and it's been a long year. And I think COVID clearly had an impact, and, the process from the federal government and unemployment and all that stuff kind of worked into the fact that we're struggling in certain areas. Fortunate for us, I think the silver lining is that transportation's been tough, but we've done pretty well in retaining staff in transportation. I mentioned this in the school committee last night. NRT is doing a good job for us, and there's been a lot of talk of reserve drivers that are looking forward to driving actually only in Westborough, and that's a credit to the district as well. So there's pressures across the board, but again, a lot of them are human capital as well.
Thank you.
One of the things too, I think we won't see the impact of this for a while, it'll play out, is that the tuitions for outplacements, they're gonna escalate their costs because there's no caps on those. So you're gonna see an average of, 15 to 20% increase on those tuitions. It's gonna be a hit. And I think, that structure is a really interesting process. When you look at the cost of technology costs, we're still coming back from the 150,000 cut to that technology cut, and with the 63,000, it still leaves us about 20,000 shy from where we were 3 years ago, and certainly things aren't cheaper. So, John just has a very good scalability control over that. He'll reduce product purchase amounts against the cost because he knows he has, and he's managing it right now with the sense that he's got a decent rollover on the number of backup devices we have in terms of literally, like, we need to put an iPad in every K-3 hand and a Chromebook, and, so his counts are good, but he's using scalability against kind of increasing costs right now. So we're definitely seeing it, but I think the team manages it really well. So those are all pieces that we feel pretty good about.
Thank you. Other question? Any other questions from the Finance Committee for Amber or staff or Kristen? Thank you very much. Do you have a message you'd like to leave with us?
No, you're so nice. Let's see, so nice. We recognize, I guess, a couple things, which is I hope you see that both of the changes that the school committee voted last night come from a place of collaboration and the earnest recognition of these conversations, and we know we are an important part of this community. We contribute and educate a good portion of this community, but we also know we are contributors to the financial impact, and we take it really seriously, and I think are always members of this conversation and don't mind being pushed on and questioned and sharing in the process. And it sends us back to keep looking and working, and I think school committee certainly has demonstrated that 5 years ago, we weren't amending a number that we voted, and, here we are looking at budgeting where we're, 5 days out from closing the warrant and we're adjusting our number. That's a very different process than I experienced in my first 5 years here. And it speaks to the recognition of the financial constraints and the commitment that we have in partnership with the town. We know it's essential that I don't like to step on town meeting floor to present a budget that isn't supported by you. I take it very seriously that your vote garners the confidence of the community. I think you saw that in the article we revisited, that when you spoke against it, it failed several years ago. Your voice is important, and your assessment of our budget is taken very seriously. So, I'm hoping that you feel that you've heard from us that we've done good work and that it's a budget you can support.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Kristen, do you have any comments? Okay. Thank you all for coming. We really do appreciate it.
Appreciate all your work. This is a lot of meetings for you.
Yeah,
Well, you went back to back last night, I guess, too, right?
yeah.
Thank you
Thank you
again.
for
All right, guys, good to see you.
Thank you, nice presentation.
Bye, Beth. Bye, Paul. I appreciate you both.
And Andrew.
Andrew, you too, Andrew, sorry, he didn't, I forgot.
Thanks and good night.
You've been
Appreciate
very
it.
quiet tonight,
Yeah,
usually,
and
you usually ask a couple questions.
You're on point. Who am I to argue?
Well said.
We're going to take a 2-minute recess and let our guests have a chance to gather their things and go home for the evening, I think, I hope. Good night,
Thank
good night,
you.
everyone.
Going to the senior center tomorrow to talk to, Christy and I are going
Yes.
together, to talk to people, so that will be nice over breakfast, so we're gonna continue to try to answer people's questions, so. All
Thank
right,
you, Amber. Good
Thanks.
night,
Good
good
night.
night, David.
David.
Hey, Dave.
Okay, any comments at all? I think, you know, I actually, just this is my own observation. You know, and I've only been on the committee for 4 years, but boy, this year, I think the school department has been put through its paces. And part of it, you know, you have to give them compliments too. The process they've used in the last 2 years, particularly this year, in terms of putting the budget together and walking it through multiple meetings so that they broke it down into manageable, chewable pieces. I think that was a really good process. I'm actually very happy to hear David talk about zero-based budgeting. So,
It's nice to meet some people who understand what that means.
yes, it is. Okay, we have to circle back to approval of the minutes. So could I have a motion to approve the minutes of February 10th, which was our last AFC meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Bradley, second.
Okay. Go to, any discussion? All right, we'll go to a vote. Beth?
Holmberg, yes?
Bradley, yes.
Paul, you're up.
I didn't step on board, did I?
What, Andrew?
I didn't
Melanie
step on
and-
board,
Yeah,
did I?
Melanie
I haven't
is
seen her, so
traveling.
And Tom's not here.
And Tom is not
Okay.
here. So
I
Paul's up.
apologize. I'm glad I didn't snuff her. Thank you.
Okay. Paul?
Yes. Thank you.
Walter?
Leslie, yes.
Roush, yes.
Already, yes. 600, yep. Okay, the next set of minutes is the joint retreat with the school committee. Walter, thank you, and I should have thanked Kristen before she left for pulling that all together.
Is that something we want to publish?
We're going to publish the minutes after the school committee has a chance to review them.
Yeah.
At their meeting.
Yep.
It's not a live video.
No,
It's meeting minutes. So if there's something in the meeting minutes you object to, then
We can
Take those
have a
out.
discussion.
discuss.
we should have thought about turning it into an executive session.
I don't think we were,
Sure, it qualifies.
yeah, well,
Yeah,
but there
well-
was some question. We discussed that in the selectman's office. And so we have the minutes. We're going to wait to hear, as Walter said, whether or not, until the school committee votes on them, to post them. But we still have to vote on them ourselves. So could I have a motion to approve?
I think I'd like to read them. And again,
Okay, so
we need to make sure that they're pretty high level.
the assumption was made that when they were distributed, everybody.
No, I'm sorry,
Everybody-
I didn't
Okay.
get to read them.
So then, let's defer action on those minutes until our next meeting, which is on the 24th. Okay?
Yep.
All right.
I mean, I don't want to be hard to deal with, but
No,
I
it's
mean,
okay,
there were a lot of discussions we had that could easily be misunderstood.
yes. But
It's written in a form where we
I s-
don't actually say who said what anyway, but
Yeah,
it's just a
that's
list
a
of
help.
topics, but well worth your time to look it through. and
Yep,
make sure
I
you're
apologize, I
comfortable with
didn't, I didn't
okay,
even think of it.
no, I'd rather everybody read them carefully than we just go ahead and take a precipitous vote. Are there any liaison reports? Okay.
The whole committee came and
I'm
talked.
sorry, go ahead, Beth.
Just thought, go ahead, Beth.
Sorry, all I was saying was the school committee came and talked to us.
I just thought I'd raise the issue that the DPW is going to be deficit spending against their snow and ice budgets. They still have headroom left in their budgets, but they're going to be replenishing lots of supplies. And in order to replenish the supplies, they're going to do, at least in one account, $100,000 of overspending. They're going to run out of salt and stuff like that. So we may have to use some of our reserve funds to help them out later on in the year when we figure out what the numbers look like.
Any questions about that? Any discussion? Okay. So any future
I have a
draft
liaison.
agendas? I'm sorry, Paul, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that the planning board recently had a joint meeting with selectmen, I think, and maybe another group, about a study that's being delivered for Otis Street. You know, a lot of changes are being contemplated there, and there's nothing in our budget or in the warrant articles for that this year, but I'm sure it will come to us.
Well, I thought
They
there
are
was,
applying for.
I thought version
funding
8
from the
had
state.
a major change for the Otis Street zoning.
Okay, but this is specifically, getting easements, changing streets, lights, a lot of things like that, when they come, maybe I'll ask them to just mention it. It has nothing to do with this year's budget, but,
Okay. Is it
Other than-
in the master plan? I don't recall seeing that in,
I don't know, but this is at the initiative of the developers. They paid for the study, and so far I think it's coming from them as their proposal.
okay.
There's a nice slide deck on the town website, and it's mostly trying to deal with traffic and at the intersection and from the intersection sort of south.
Yeah,
And dealing with maybe combining driveways where lights would go, studying
Right,
stuff.
which is a
Yeah.
planning board, so they're not bringing anything to town meeting,
No.
but they are
I
bringing,
think the planning board thing looks more like just zoning that,
yeah, but the planning board stuff's it's all zoning stuff, right?
Yeah.
But they are coming with a substantial zoning article.
Yep.
Actually, more than one, I think, and I assume they're gonna talk about that when they come visit with us.
Yes.
Anything else, Paul?
No, that's it. The only thing I had a few seconds to think about it, and I really think that those minutes should not be. That's a public meeting. I don't think they should be edited behind. When we're not.
Oh,
I'm afraid we
No.
know
Nobody's talking about editing minutes. No.
That's what I'm just saying. They should be as forthright as possible in my mind. Even though I wasn't there, I read them and they looked good to me. Thank
Okay,
you.
good. Well, we'll have that discussion again, or a discussion next week. Okay, we'll give everybody a chance to go through them one more time. If there are no other liaison reports, future draft agendas, just to review the calendar very quickly. Our next meeting is next Thursday. Monday is a holiday. We have the CPA folks coming, the Community Preservation Act folks coming. We have the planning board and to talk about, and the zoning folks to talk about the articles in the warrant. And an invitation has been extended to the Council on Aging, and I don't know that we've heard back from them.
I've ring their bell again today, and I should have an answer before the end of the week as to whether they really want to come or not.
So next week could be a long meeting.
How about the citizens, but the two citizen petitions, are they gonna come visit
Yeah,
with us?
well, right now, that is going to fall on the 28th. So on the 28th, we have to, in addition to starting a discussion on the R&R message, we have the Community Development Director coming in to speak to their article, and we have the citizens petition on Indigenous Peoples' Day. That'll be Lisa Endenberg from the school committee who'll be bringing that in. I've heard nothing yet from the folks who put on the new citizens petition, which is on the payment of, what was that number, 33, 34? I'm sorry.
What do you mean?
The new citizens.
Oh, which number it is? It's
Yeah.
number 36.
36. I've had no conversation with them about attending a meeting, and if they are going to attend, it'll have to be one of the March meetings. Also, I understand that there is still another petition out there that has not yet come forward in a definitive article, and we might have to include that one in one of our future meetings. But other than that, the day I'm looking at is March 14th, which is the day the R&R has to go to the printer. So we've got all of these meetings, unless, we can schedule others if you feel there's a need to bring anybody else in. Otherwise, we'll solidify the calendar, and then we'll focus on starting our R&R messaging as well. Any questions, any concerns?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to mention that
Yep.
we received the draft minutes for the joint, that all-day meeting with the select board, and that, well, we received them right before this meeting, right? So it's too late to consider them for today, but you probably send those out, and
Yep.
maybe we can
We'll get them
finish
next week.
those up on next Thursday, too.
So please be prepared for a long meeting next week. And hopefully we'll have a full complement. By the way, Tom is not here tonight because of a blessed event. So some congratulations are due to him to joining the I guess, the family of parents, or the club of parents. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So
Motion
moved.
to adjourn.
I have a
There's-
question. Did we want to talk about Article 6? Because we were talking about revoting that? Or do we want to hold that till the
You
next
mean
meeting?
the
This is the
reimbursement?
AFC
Oh,
replenishment.
sorry, replenishment. No, we decided that, I think we're going to wait until we go through the warrant, article by article, and vote to have a discussion about that. In fact, this is one of the points that I think Hank was bringing up, about the deficit spending that we're aware of now, potential deficit spending we're aware of now from the DPW on snow and ice, that might perhaps want us to reconsider, or force us to reconsider what our numbers are. But we're gonna see how things unfold over the next couple of weeks, Andrew. We have right up until town meeting, or even at town meeting, to make an adjustment if necessary. But we're definitely, we'll vote on it, when the time comes to vote on the warrant.
Yeah, I mean, just a clarification, there's only 5 members, sorry, 6 members here tonight, too.
Yeah.
So I was under the assumption we would vote it when we voted all the other articles at this point.
Yep.
Hopefully, everybody's there.
Is that okay, Andrew?
Yeah, it will do. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion and we have a second. Any discussion about adjourning?
Who motioned and who seconded?
I thought
I didn't hear.
Hank motioned to adjourn,
Okay.
and I believe Beth seconded, was that correct? Is that what I heard? Beth?
No, I motioned at the same time as Hank, so I didn't actually second it, but I will second it.
Okay, well, there you go.
Okay.
Okay, Beth?
Blumberg, yes.
Bradley, yes.
Eagle, yes?
Leslie, yes.
Roush, yes.
Peretti, yes.
Excellent.
We are adjourned. Thank you, folks.
Bye, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Westborough TV.
Yes,
Thanks
thank
all.
you.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Karen. Good night.
Cheers.
See you guys next week.